r/AskReddit, what type of death was common 100 plus years ago that is very rare today? My best friend's mom died of a cyst on her foot. It burst, she got sepsis, and she died. In 2021. Accidental poisonings. Arsenic, mercury, lead, etc. Also penicillin was discovered until 1928, so a lot of infections were pretty deadly. Honestly, intentional poisonings have gone down too, thanks to no-fault divorce. 100 years ago tooth infections had a relatively high mortality rate, 1 in 10 would die. 400 years ago tooth infections were basically a death sentence and one of the leading causes of death in Europe. Today tooth infections are easily dealt with. The discovery of antibiotics is by far the greatest achievement in human history. Still a massive factor in the development of cardiac infections. Pellagra in the US was common due to the heavy use of corn in rural diets. Eventually led to the discovery and understanding of vitamins in the early 1900s when the government was trying to pin down the cause of it. Nasty way to go. Before they found out what pellagra really was, there was a case of a person who was cured by a blood transfusion, so this place used that to treat people, for a while anyway. A unit of blood from a healthy person contains enough niacin to briefly relieve the symptoms. Anything involving a horse. Instead of kicked to death by a Mustang, now you get rolled over by a Mustang. Yeah, everyone keeps bringing up diseases, but 1924? Horses were everywhere, poorly treated and ill-tempered. Before antibiotics, people would die right and left from bacterial infections. Automobiles have taken over. Smallpox, pertussis, measles. Anti-vaxxers would probably revise their stance if these made a comeback. I don't know, man. I recently was playing Oregon Trail and my very own fuckhead died of the measles. I was notified about fuckhead's death by a notification that had a simple tombstone that read fuckhead died of the measles. Bubonic plague too. It was recently the 100-year anniversary of successfully treating type 1 diabetes. It was a death sentence before 1922. Tuberculosis. XMDR-TB scares me more than HIV. That's tuberculosis that is resistant to all known treatments, and while it's very rare, there are sanatoria in equatorial areas for people who have this, so they can be kept comfortable until they die, and not spread it in the community. Infection. It still happens now, but it was more frequent. And it seems to be making a comeback. I work as a rehab therapist and we've seen so many people die of sepsis recently. They go in for benign surgeries, never make it home. A lot of failing amputations and orthopedic surgeries, too. Consumption. Penicillin was invented in 1928, so just about 100 years ago. Before the invention of penicillin and other antibiotics, getting a bacterial infection was quite hazardous. Simple wounds can kill if one wasn't careful or if one was unlucky. They had some wild-ass execution methods back in the day. LMAO. Diarrhea. Dysentery. My stepfather essentially died of diarrhea. In a modern hospital in 2018. It was a side effect of chemo. I don't know exactly what happened as I am in a different country and my mother is still too upset to discuss it. Which means it must have been really awful. She's the most pragmatic and unsqueamish person I know. Guillotine. You could make a religion out of th. No, don't. Fun fact, the last execution by guillotine was in 1972. Edit, due to an ID10T error this should say 1977. Dysentery. Sudden infant death syndrome. Polio. This one is so scary to me. Imagine carrying your child for 9 months, going through labor and everything looks good, and then your baby dies. Pneumonia in young people. Measles. Polio. Smallpox. Diphtheria. TB. Childbirth. Deaths from black widow spider bites. And closely related species. The secret? Indoor plumbing. Turns out a lot of bites happened when folks would go to the outhouse late at night and would get bitten while doing their business. Deleted. Blood infection due to dental cavity. My father died of that 2 years ago. The infection from his tooth traveled to his heart and ate away his artificial valve. I had no idea that was even a possibility. Lynching. Being shot while bootlegging. Mustard gas attacks and trench warfare. 100 years ago was the 1920s, people. That's WWIN Prohibition, Jim Crow, and the KKK, etc. And GT, trench warfare. This one, at least, has made an unexpected comeback rather recently. There's a few 100,000 Russians and Ukrainians that might disagree with you on the trench warfare. Being killed by someone who was born in the 1800s. This one. The iron lung thing sounds like a terrible way to live, even if you did survive. Not rare. The bozo in this thread trying to disprove everyone, probably. Diseases like tuberculosis, influenza, and pneumonia were common causes of death 100 plus years ago but are now relatively rare due to advancements in medicine, vaccinations and public health measures. Smallpox. It killed 300,500 million people in the 20th century alone. It is extremely contagious and has a 30% fatality rate, and those who do survive are often severely scarred. Infections, despite the pandemic. Imagine if we didn't have the testing, drugs, or oxygen supply that we currently do. The pandemic could be a lot worse. Nobody has mentioned bad hips. Today hip replacement is fairly routine, although there are sometimes complications. 100 years ago when your hip went bad they gave you a wheelchair and a bottle of morphine and you'd be dead in a year or two. Guinea worm. Thanks, Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. Childbirth. Skin infection gone septic. Dual challenge. I demand satisfaction. My mom's husband up in age and he had it as a kid, said he saw the kid literally next to him in the hospital died of it. It's not rare, but cancer used to be way more deadly. It was a death sentence. You weren't discussing treatment options, you were discussing pain management options and end-of-life care. Traveling. Hashtag consumption. In Victorian times it was all the rage. A very romantic disease to die from in novels at the time and actually quite hellish in reality. Tuberculosis was actually already on the way out a century ago thanks to science, but ever since the 80s it has been making a resurgence thanks to AIDS and the rise of drug-resistant strains. Radiation exposure. Yep, my dad had it as a child. You can probably guess his view on vaccinations, especially stuff like polio which is completely preventable nowadays. American Senator Mitch McConnell is a polio survivor, yet he stood with the antivax side. Infection. Calvin Coolidge's son died of a blister from not wearing socks while playing tennis on the White House tennis court. That was less than 100 years ago. We are so lucky. Hello everyone. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to humbly ask you to subscribe to the channel. According to my statistics, 100% of my viewers in the past 28 days are not subscribed. I have always wanted this channel to reach 1000 subscribers, and if you want to support and be a part of that, subscribe. It's free and it's an awesome way to support the channel. Thanks again, Reddit glitch out.